Okay, it's about 6:04, 6:05. If people could start finding a seat, we'll get this show rolling on time. Please do load up on the suites. There's an awful lot back there, so that's to keep you going. And while we're getting settled, if the PAXCAP members who are in attendance could work their way down over here, that would be very helpful. Okay, if we could get everyone to take a seat, that would be very, very helpful. And the PAXCAP members could work their way down towards the front. We'd like to acknowledge you. I see Tony, David. Come on down. All right, well, thank you very much for settling down. My name is Eileen Goodwin, and I have a company called Apex Strategies, and I do meeting facilitation for a living, and it's a pleasure to be back here. This is the community meeting, our third one for the grade separation project with this consulting team. So thank you for joining us tonight, and in just a few minutes, I am going to ask a few demographic questions about those of you who are here. But first, I wanted to go through the agenda, and if Etty could advance the slide so everyone could see it. As you can see, we have a packed agenda this evening. We are getting a start here at 6 o'clock. We do anticipate getting out of here around 8 o'clock. And what we'll be doing in between is you're going to hear from your city manager in just a moment, and he'll give an update and background and some purpose and some things that have been happening recently with this project at the city council level. And then he'll turn it over to Etty Mercurio with AECom. She's our project lead, and she will be showing you some new information that is new for this community meeting. And it's going to be about Churchill Avenue and South Palo Alto tunnel alternatives. And we do have some videos for you tonight. And so she'll be walking through that information. Then we'll take a break and take some Q&A. And as those of you who've been here before know, I like to work my way around the room. So I'll be calling on folks, and we'll keep our experts down front and get some questions and answers done. But as has happened in previous meetings, and I'm assuming it's going to happen again this evening, there's going to be a lot of detailed questions that really are better answered working at the various stations. So you probably noticed, those of you who've been to one of these meetings before, maybe both of the previous meetings, that we have even more boards tonight. So the reason for that is because not only do we have a lot of new information, we brought back all the old information. And we want to make sure that anybody who is coming here new or had only seen one or maybe not all of the meetings, we had an opportunity to meet with and talk to the engineers on all of the various alternatives. Not only the ones that we've talked about, but we actually have a station talking about the ones that are no longer in play. And so if you have an interest in something that is no longer being considered, we actually have a station for that as well. We have a station for traffic and noise and people who work on hydraulics. And you're going to see some matrices in this PowerPoint. We've got a station to talk about that. And we brought all of our previous videos from the other community meetings, as well as the ones that you'll see tonight, are also down front, so that we'll only have time to play them once during the PowerPoint, but each one of them is available here too. So they'll be on constant loop, so you can get a chance to look at those during our workshop station open house portion of the meeting. Then at about 8:20, I'll reconvene everyone who chooses to stay. You do not need to stay if you've had your questions answered and felt like you saw enough and you want to go home and watch the Raiders. But for those who do stay, what we'll do is we'll reconvene everyone, and then I'll have the station leads at each of the stations give a report out of the kinds of topics and issues and concerns and questions that they answered, so everybody has a chance to see how their input related to maybe some of your neighbors or others that talk to that station. We also have quite a few handouts tonight, and this is a new development. We have fact sheets on everything, so you should also have a packet with a that's got a paper clip. Thank you. My goodness. With a paper clip on it. Thank you, Ed. And it's fact sheets of all the various options, and so you can follow along. They're yours to keep, take some notes, etc. And then also tonight we have 2 different comment cards. And one of them is labeled Meadow Charleston, and that's the white one. And the other one is labeled, the yellow one is labeled Churchill. And so it asks you a few questions about whether you feel like you have enough information, whether the city's ready to make a decision or not, and if not, what additional information you need. And then there's space on both cards to write other comments. So if you have other comments about other topics, feel free to use these cards as well. So does anybody have any questions about how the agenda will work? So just we'll do the PowerPoint. You're also going to hear from our traffic consultant and Gary Black with Hexagon. He will take a few of the slides towards the end of the PowerPoint. I'm going to ask your indulgence. We get all the way through the PowerPoint before we open it to Q&A, and we can always flip back to any of the slides that you need us to have up while we answer questions. Then we'll probably have about 10, 15, maybe a little longer minutes of Q&A, and then we'll adjourn to the stations, and then we'll reconvene before 8 o'clock. So any questions on that before I ask you some demographics? All right, everybody got the gist of how we're going to do things. So how many of you have been at both of the previous meetings? This is helpful for our speakers. So I'm seeing about maybe a third of you were at both. How about and you can vote. I'd like to say I'm from Chicago. You get to vote multiple times here. So how many people were, and if you just said both, please raise your hand again when you said you were at the first meeting. So I get a sense of that. Okay, so a really good number. I'm going to say about 65% of you were at the first meeting. How about the second meeting? Okay, great. So that's maybe about 60%, slightly less, and then 1/3 of you were able to make it to both, so that's fantastic. So I'm also going to have a show of hands of how many people this is your first community meeting on the project. All right, so that's not really adding up, but a lot of new people. It's the new math. Yeah, and then there's lots of city council meetings. There's been study sessions, et cetera, and I know there's always been a good crowd at those because many times our project team has been presenting at those. We also want to hear about how you've heard about the meeting because that's extremely helpful for the staff and others who have helped to get the word out. So again, please vote every time that this is relevant to you. How many people were on the city website and you just kind of fell into seeing about it? Okay. That's a big 0. All right, how about Nextdoor? You saw something on Nextdoor? This is usually one of my big ones. Okay, about 40% of you have a hand up. There's something called the New Blog, which Ed will go over here in just a minute, but this is a new thing, social media from the city. Anybody see that? Couple, I see about 2 people. Okay, how about the Palo Alto Daily? Did they do anything? The Post? Oh, wow, this is great. So the newspaper and the weekly, so I'm going to say that's again about, different hands, but the newspaper was clearly a popular thing. Anybody see the flyer? I know the city put some flyers around. Oh, fantastic. All right, that's very popular. And then anybody here for word of mouth? Usually this is a spouse who's getting bribed with dinner or something. But no, your neighbor or somebody else told you. Okay, so about 1/3 of you also have a good network, so you're hearing. Is there something else that I should have asked that I didn't ask that would be useful for the group to know so we can? Email, okay. And is there a specific group that was the email? Palo Alto Online. Great. And then the PAXCAP folks. Somebody heard from an PAXCAP person, so they did 1/3. All right, and let's give a round of applause and bring the PAXCAP members that are in attendance up here. I see Nadia. I know Tony was here. Come on down, David. Come on, come on, come on. So these are people who are your neighbors, and they have been working tirelessly for, oh my gosh, it used to be called the CAP. The first 2 meetings we were here was called the CAP. Keith. And we've now expanded it, so it's called the XCAP, for Expanded Community Advisory Panel. That's what CAP means. So I'm going to hand the microphone and ask each of them to name themselves and which neighborhood they're representing on this group. Keith.
I'm Keith Reckdahl. I'm Charleston Meadows.
Hi, I'm Nadia Nayak, and I'm Old Palo Alto.
I'm Patricia Lau, and I live at Altair Walk.
I'm Tony Carrasco. I live in Palo Alto.
Dave Shen, Old Palo Alto.
In-Young Cho, Southgate.
And we've got about another, what would we say, half dozen or so that didn't make it tonight that are also there representing different neighborhoods. And the Chamber of Commerce and the school district also sit on this. And Nadia was very modest there. She's the current chair of the group. So we really do want to give you a round of applause. They're meeting monthly, and so now they've gone to even multiple times a month. So they are really putting in their work. Thank you. Okay. Terrific. They are also here with name tags. They're very knowledgeable. And during our breakout session, if you happen to see one of those folks near you, that's highly likely they can help you through any of our displays, because they really have been working hard on and know an awful lot about this topic. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our city manager, Ed Shikata. He is going to give you several slides, and then he'll introduce Etty, and she'll take it away. And again, if we could hold the questions till the Q&A, that would be very, very helpful.
Thank you very much, Eileen. Once again, my name's Ed Shikata. I'm city manager. I'm going to provide some of this background and really hopefully provide both a bit of context and orientation for what happens tonight relative to the decision-making process that the city council ultimately is undertaking. So let me just hit a few points here. Just a little background. Eileen covered much of this with the CAP now being expanded to provide additional input, and has been asked by the council, city council, to develop a recommendation as to making selections among the alternatives that we'll be talking about this evening. The couple of just background notes that a citywide tunnel has been removed, and we've got some background for those who want more information about the citywide tunnel concept that has been evaluated and is no longer being considered as a part of this scope. Palo Alto Avenue, for those not familiar with the north end of town at the San Francisco Creek, crossing of Palo Alto Avenue at the railroad tracks, just, we'll call it south of the creek, south of Menlo Park, is being taken out of scope right now. That's another issue we'll take up after we've resolved some of the questions and some of the choices here, given its proximity and the interrelationship between Palo Alto Avenue, downtown, the downtown Caltrain station, and issues there. And then finally, local funding is an ongoing discussion. We've got multiple venues that we're talking about that. One part of it is a business tax that the city council is considering, various forms, various uses, but an ongoing discussion at the council. Meanwhile, we're also having discussions with VTA and with Caltrain, especially with VTA as it relates to the county, Santa Clara County Measure B funds, of which there is a separate allocation for grade separations in Palo Alto, Mountain View, and Sunnyvale. Next slide, please. There we go. Oh. Okay. Oh. Take your pick. Just, again, not to assume. And at this point, based on the hands that were raised earlier, I suspect everyone knows this, but just vocabulary. Right? We don't want to assume that folks are taking what we speak as a grade separation and understanding what that means, or an at-grade crossing, as the case may be. Typically, folks that are involved with railroads consider when the street and the rail are at the same level, when gates are used as the way of indicating when the train's coming by, so the cars and pedestrians and bicyclists needs to stop, those are considered an at-grade crossing. But we don't have one for grade separation, do we? Okay, so, well, then grade separation is the alternative, where you've actually constructed either the rail above the street or the street above the rail in a way that allows both to pass without the use of gates. So that's just, again, for the purpose of vocabulary. Just, again, to give a bit of backdrop here, we have been at this, for a while. And and for some of you, I know, for years, several years. And so most recently, with the selection, the identification, the involvement of the CAP, Community Advisory Panel and now the expanded Community Advisory Panel, really over the course of the last year and a half, essentially, that we've really been in earnest, looking very closely at Churchill, Meadow, Charleston, and what some of the options are there. Our time frame, based on the most recent discussion at the City Council, is to be back to the City Council for a decision in the time frame of April and May. And the PAXCAP itself has the assignment and the request from the Council to develop a recommendation within that time frame. Our goal is to get community feedback between now and then, and I'll describe that in a little more detail with the timeline. And this meeting tonight is the beginning of this next phase of what we're calling a bit of a roadshow, where we'll be presenting some of the same information, but really, as Eileen pointed out, for the first time, really trying to include all of the information on each one of the crossings, so that where to date it's really been a very specific about a tunnel, about a trench, about what have been called hybrids, but now we're putting them all together so folks have all of the information in again, to the extent that we could, very digestible form, so that we can talk about all of the options at once. Gotcha. We have a little technical difficulty. Hang on for 1 sec. Next. Okay. So just in terms of the phase that we're at, I think we've been starting to talk about the work that's come to date as understanding the options. And again, we started with 40 some odd options, and now we're down to, I think it's been described as 7. And that effort has really been over this past year and plus, and has involved the engineering analysis, the discussions among neighbors, and getting some input, and really working on the terminology and trying to ensure that the information that's put together is understandable, and again, we can use consistent terms so folks can understand what those options are. We're now really entering into what we're starting to call this community conversations phase, where we want to roll up the information that's been developed for each one of the options and now start to get more comprehensive feedback from community members on each one of those options that will ultimately lead to a decision, whether it's a decision or recommendation that comes from the PAXCAP, or ultimately a decision by the City Council on what a preferred alternative approach is for each one of the crossings. Now, in fact, I have neglected, have mentioned the City Council several times in the last couple of minutes, and I neglected to point them out. And I'm going to limit my acknowledgement to the current council, because if I pointed out the former council members here, they'd be half the room. So current council includes Allison Cormack, who's here. Feel free, you can clap, that's all good. Our mayor, Eric Fulseth, in the back. Let's see, I saw Lydia Koo also. There she is, yes. And Liz Niss, also here. And let's see, did I miss any other council members who are here? Okay, those are the ones here right now. I suspect we may have others coming along the way. Okay, but again, this is really the path over the last year plus, leading to next spring, April, May timeframe. Next slide, please. Oh, and yes, we are there. Okay, community conversations. As a part of this phase, lasting between now and into the spring, we've launched a whole series, and thanks to Megan Horgan-Taylor, who's in the back, our new Chief Communications Officer, I hope you have seen a rapid increase in the information and hopefully clarity of the information that we're now pushing out to help people get up to speed and understand the issues and where we are in the process. So we've launched our new website that credit also Chantel Cotton Gaines and our entire team that has really worked on simplifying some of the really technical information that was previously online. Megan has started this blog series that, again, perhaps less so for the folks here because of the number of hands that came up, and clearly that many of you have been tracking it for months, really for your neighbors who have not been tracking it. So if you know folks that have not been involved and you're saying you really need to get involved, refer them to the blog or send them the blog. This is the, and we've got a number of platforms that we're using that are really intended to give people bite-sized information so that they can get informed without having to wade through the kind of information we're going to have this evening. Fact sheets, we talked about, again, to put it in a pretty handy format to be able to see each of the options and the additional collateral material. And in fact, Eileen also pointed out the comment cards. Part of our goal tonight with the comment cards here is to answer questions. And as Eileen pointed out, we've now got 2 cards. Given that so much of our discussions have now become more and more focused. So we've got the yellow for Churchill and the white for Charleston Meadow. To the extent that your questions relate specifically to one or the other, we want to give you a format to hopefully answer the questions tonight, but to the extent that those questions remain, write them down. And that will help us for the next meetings that will largely happen after the first of the year, so that we can ensure that over the successive several more community meetings we'll be having over the next few months, we can make sure those questions are answered. Oh, and let's see, we also did want to point out, as Eileen just pointed out to me, that there is a checkbox here that if you think, okay, enough already, we've gotten enough information, if, let's say, for example, for Charleston Meadow, you believe that there's enough information to be able to make a decision, that you indicate that as well. That's one of the options. But let's talk about what happens post the decision, because I think it's really important to understand how this relates to actually getting to both funding and construction. Let's see, so already covered this, so why don't we keep going. Whoa, now this, boy, that's a lot of information. I didn't realize it was going to be that busy. But so just to get a little orientation, on the left, we've got August 2019 through 2020. I guess that's January right in the middle, and up to May over on the right. So we've got a series of meetings that we'll be having, as well as potentially polling. And as you see, what's in red are 11/7, tonight's community meeting. Over in February, we expect to have another town hall, March and April, additional town hall meetings, where, as I mentioned, we'll take your feedback tonight on questions that remain, get additional information, and roll those into the town halls that will happen after the beginning of the year. I think the rest are just other methods of trying to maintain communication, as well as the PAXCAP meetings, which tend to be pretty technical, as Eileen pointed out. Oh, and we will be posting this information. So sorry for those of you who already shot photos, but that way you can make sure we're keeping the same information here as well as online. Next slide, please. And then this takes, we'll say, zoom back. So now we've got over the course of multiple years. Over on the left, we've got 2018. In bold, it's 2020. But we also wanted to really put this tonight in the context of the process that's involved in any type of project, like a grade separation construction. That let's start with the yellow, November 2020. Well, actually, so we're assuming that through this planning process, the council will ultimately select preferred alternatives at each one of the crossings. Oops, can we go back? And based on that decision in early 2020, we will start, and that's in green, shown there, we'll start the next phase, which is the environmental review, environmental studies that will be necessary for that preferred alternative. Now, at this point, nothing's, as they say, in concrete. There's still analysis, there are options, there are variations, and there could be information that causes us to want to revisit the decision on preferred alternatives. That's a part of the environmental review process. And we'll just follow the yellow. So in May of 2023, so we're allowing basically a couple of years for that environmental review process and many of the studies that are required in order to be prepared to get into final design on a project like this. In red, starting in May 2023, we have agreements that will be required with Caltrain, since it's their railroad, their property, with the city to set expectations on how the design process, the construction process would work, with VTA as to how the funding will work, and various other parties that would be involved as well, including the Valley Water. Let's see, in 2026, over in the red, we're showing early agency approvals. The agencies such as the Santa Clara Valley Water District, now known as Valley Water, will need to see very detailed design before they will approve any changes to the storm water system or stormwater control system within the area. And the same is true for each one of the agencies, not the least of which is Caltrain. And then we're extending out, I'll just jump to the blue boxes we see here. In spring, summer of 2026 would likely be the earliest that we would be able to award construction contracts to start the actual construction of the work on grade separations. And assuming a several year time frame, and again, this is really trying to consolidate the multiple crossings. We've got, again, an operating railroad that will be running during this entire construction period. So the real point is to understand that while here we are, 2019, almost 2020, but this is a multi-year effort that will be involved before you actually see construction, potentially 7-ish years out. Okay, with that, should I
All right,
turn it
thank
back
you. Anyway, I just want to thank everyone for taking time out tonight to be here, and I'm glad to see this great attendance here. So there are 4 Palo Alto at-grade crossings. Ed talked a little bit about that. We have Palo Alto Avenue in the north, which is going to be in a future study. We have Churchill Avenue crossing, which we're going to be talking about here today. The Meadow Charleston crossings, which are combined, and we're going to be talking about 2 additional alternatives on that tonight, in addition to the 3 that we talked about at a previous community meeting. So, Ed's, let me go back here before I start this video here. Oops, going the wrong way. So, as Ed mentioned, this is an at-grade crossing, and he described what an at-grade crossing is. And I want to kind of go the why we're looking at this project, is because we really do have some major safety concerns. This is actually up in your sister city, up in Menlo Park, and this is, people behave badly at-grade crossings. Here you have the light is turned red on El Camino. The cars start to back up, and you have you have this car, that white car, that is now stuck on the tracks. Now, if a train were to come by right now, the gates would go down, and this car could be potentially trapped, and you could have a serious accident at this location. So, this is just one example of people behaving badly. I know in your community, you've probably seen other examples of these at these at-grade crossings themselves. So why are we undertaking this effort? Well, first off, for that example, is we really want to increase, I'm having trouble with buttons here today. We want to increase public safety for both vehicles, bicycles, and pedestrians. So when we eliminate that conflict between pedestrians, bicyclists, and motor vehicles with the railroad, we can increase safety and we enhance traffic mobility and circulation as well. And just want to point out that the most dangerous grade crossings in the United States, Charleston is ranked number 4 by the Federal Railroad Association, Meadow Drive is ranked number 5, and Churchill Avenue is number 15. So you have some pretty dangerous crossings in the eyes of the Federal Railroad Association. This is a slide from Caltrain's vision of their business plan. On the left-hand side, we have Churchill. This is kind of just a schematic diagram of the various crossings within Palo Alto for Caltrain, with Churchill and then Meadow and Charleston. And what I'm trying to show with this slide here is right now Caltrain is projecting that you have about a 6-minute delay at Churchill and about a 7-minute delay at Meadow and Charleston. And Caltrain's business plan will be increasing the number of trains over the next several years, so that in 2040 you will be seeing that increased about 137% increase in delay at Churchill, as well as increased delays at Meadow and Charleston. So what you are experiencing today as far as delays will be getting worse because there will be more trains in the future per Caltrain's business plan. So our traffic consultant, Gary, who will be talking here a little bit longer, he ran some analysis on the delays, and particularly just looked at, this is Churchill here. This picture here is here's the railroad tracks. This is Alma, and this is Churchill. And I'm not a traffic engineer, so I'm just going to try and summarize this. And Gary will be available to be able to answer this more. But basically, if you look at in the afternoon, what we call PMQs, when you have your peak traffic delays, is in the year. The black is what's today. You know, you're sitting at the light. You know, and it takes you 2 to 3 cycles before you can get through the intersection. In 2040, based on those Caltrain increased trains, you'll be sitting at, you know, waiting to clear through the intersections on about 3 to 5 timing cycles, or what is that, about 15 minutes? Something on that in the PMQ. And in the AM, the what we call these excessive queues is right now you're probably waiting 2 to 3 light cycles before you can get through the intersection. And with increased train traffic, you'll be waiting somewhere on the order of 4 to 5 cycles. So it's going to take you much, much longer to get through these intersections because of the increased train traffic. So that's why we're looking at these projects, is we're looking at how to avoid that conflict. And so we've already looked at some of the alternatives, Meadow, Charleston, and those ones are over there that we'll look at. But tonight we're going to focus on a couple alternatives that we haven't presented before. And this is going to be the South Palo Alto Tunnel, and these are basically the same alternative, but there's a slight variation. The first one is we're going to be running the passenger and freight in the same tunnel. And then the variation on that, which we were requested by council to look at, is to have just passenger rail in the tunnel and leave the freight on the surface. And then I'll go on and talk a little bit about Churchill, and I'll come back to that. So let me start off. We're going to start looking, let me talk about the South Palo Alto Tunnel. And this South Palo Alto Tunnel basically starts at the, anyway, this is the portal, the north portal for the South Palo Alto Tunnel. And what we have on the left-hand side is the twin bore tunnels. And this is looking, this is kind of cutting the cake and looking at the cake, but we're looking north with the twin bore tunnels on the left-hand side. And in this case, we have to shoe fly or detour the trains, and those will be immediately to the east of the twin bore tunnels. And then because of right-of-way issues, Alma actually has to neck down to 2 lanes during the construction period. And when we get to the videos, you'll see this a little more clearly. This is the north portal. To go to the south portal, we have a similar situation. We're going to have the twin bore tunnels here on the left-hand side, the shoe fly, which is the detour while we're constructing the tunnels. And here we have less right-of-way, so Alma gets necked down to 1 lane during construction, or one-way road. And then in between the portals, when we're in the twin bores themselves, it's pretty much the surface streets are as they are today, 4-lane Alma Street. So we have a video here. This is a 3D animation. This is an aerial view of Palo Alto. The green, the lime green, is the Caltrain tracks. The red is the temporary or the detour tracks. One of the first things that we have to do is we have to do some major relocations. Then we can start, the purple, we can start constructing the tunnel approach tracks, the tunnel portals, and then once those tunnel portals are done, then we can actually start our boring machines and bore for the tracks in the tunnel. So we're going to start at the north end, kind of fly in here, and we're just going to walk through what the project looks like from north to south. So as I mentioned, we're going to have major utility relocations because we're going to be doing a large trench, which you'll see shortly. One of the first things we have to do is we have to remove the vegetation. Then we can install the temporary fence. This is all getting ready so we can build that temporary detour. We're going to be altering Alma by shifting it to the east. And then Alma will be necked down to 1 lane in each direction. We can build the shoe flyers, this is the temporary tracks. This allows us then to move Caltrain, which is an operating commuter rail, onto these temporary tracks. And once Caltrain is on the temporary tracks, then we can start the major construction. First off, we'd be looking at building the trench, which means we have to remove surface obstructions that are in the way of the trench construction. As we start the trench construction, we're going down to deep enough, but we hit Matadero Creek. And this is a huge engineering challenge in the fact that Matadero Creek has quite high flows, And from an engineering point, you either can maybe solve it with a siphon or a lift, but it also has huge environmental impacts as well because it is a creek. Once we get down deep enough, then we can actually then start our boring machines. These are large boring machines, and with some of the geotechnical constraints, what we're showing here is that there's about a 15-foot separation between the twin bores, which makes our portal about 100 feet wide and 44 feet deep. This is why we have neck down to 2 lanes in each direction on Alma, with the chute fly there to the left of it. Once we have our portals done, then we can start our boring below surface, and everything above surface remains untouched. We're deep enough in the bores that we can go below Barron Creek, so Barron Creek is not impacted, and we stay deep until we start to come up, and we'll come up to a portal just after Charleston. So as we get towards the southern portal, again, we have to build a temporary chute fly. We have to neck down Alma. As I mentioned before, Alma is going to be only 1 lane because of the constrictions of the portal. And then you can see Adobe Creek up there in the top of the screen. This is about where we have to start our portal. Again, we do the same process where we have to build the chute fly. We do we reduce Alma to 1 lane, and then that allows us then to be able to, that allows us then to be able to do the trench construction. As you see here, some of the backyards here are going to be impacted because that trench is actually quite deep. And in order to do some of the structural support, we have to do something called a tieback, which has a subsurface easement into those backyards, and then also restricts probably what they can plant in their backyards. So we're going to head back. So this is just showing the construction of the chute fly as well as the construction of a reduced Alma. So now we're going to turn back around and show the trench construction to the south portal, where again we go back, we do a trench. Here we have the Adobe Creek. Again, we are going to have major engineering challenges on designing something because these are quite high flow creeks, and there's also the environmental issues of dealing with the creek. Once we have built the portal, then we can construct a roof partially, up to where we can, over there. And then we can also then construct a partial roof over the trench in the north portal as well. And then to finish off, you could then go through and do some type of planting or finishing of the structure. But because of the tunnel and stuff, we may be limited in what kind of vegetation you can install above that. This is just kind of a view of the finished look of a south tunnel. And in this case, the freight and the passenger rail are going to be running in the same twin bore tunnels. And then once that's done, then you can restore Alma back to its configuration of 4 lanes or 2 lanes, as the case may be. I'll just let this. So the next alternative that we were asked to look at was something very similar, which is to have a South Palo Alto tunnel about the same limits. But in this case, what we were asked to do is look at having passenger trains only in the tunnel and leave the freight on top. What that allows us to do is it allows us to reduce the size of the twin bore, the diameter of the tunnel, and so it makes the portal a little bit less, and it allows us to reduce the length of the length as well, but not a whole lot. So this is a view looking at very similar, looking at the north portal. And instead of 2 lanes, we were able to actually accommodate 3 lanes, so you could have 2 lanes with a left turn pocket. At the south portal, we've been able to, you'll be able to get a 2-lane road at Alma as opposed to the 1 lane in the previous alternative. And then you'd also, did I just go forward? Oh, I went the wrong way, sorry. And this is a video Did I go backwards? Hold on. Sorry, I went the wrong way. And this is the South Palo Alto. In the final configuration, you'd have passenger rail running in the twin bores, and you would have freight running on the surface level. And we did check with Caltrain, and currently the freight railroad has the abilities, they have the right to run on both tracks. So that's why we're showing both tracks in this location. So if you were to have to be able to get them down to one track, you would have to do some kind of agreement and probably acquire those operating rights from the freight railroad. So now we can get to the animation. This is very, very similar to the first animation. The green tracks are the Caltrain tracks. The red is going to be our shoe fly around those portals from the north and south. We still will have major utility relocations because of that trench through there. Then we can build the approach tracks. And once we build the approach tracks and the north and south portals, then we can then start the tunneling machine and build our tracks in the tunnel. Again, we're going to fly it to the north and start kind of looking at this project from the north to the south. Start with utility relocations that include all your major utilities through there that have to be relocated. We'll start with removing vegetation so that we're clearing the way for installing a temporary shoe fly. That includes installing temporary barricades or fencing, reconfiguring Alma Street, shifting it, as well as then putting in one lane southbound and one lane northbound. Then we can build the shoe fly, move Caltrain to the, the temporary tracks. And once we've placed Caltrain on the temporary shoe fly tracks, then it allows us to clear our construction so that we can begin the construction of the trench and the tunnels themselves. This will involve removing some of the surface level obstructions, and then we can start the trench. Again, we hit Embarcadero Creek. This is going to be an engineering channel, how to divert a creek from not only an engineering but from an environmental standpoint as well. And we also have subsurface impacts to the yards with the tiebacks required for the tall walls. Now, since we were able to reduce the size of the tunnels, we're able to reduce the size of the portal here. And the previous one, we were at about 100 feet. Here, we're at 90 feet and 40 feet, so we've reduced it by about 10 feet. We've been asked by some other folks, can you get these tighter together if we did some ground improvements? And we did take a look at that. And if we did ground improvements to bring these tunnels in to have a 2-foot separation, we'd only pick up about 10 feet, so we'd still have a restriction on Alma. So as we move down, the tunnels are going to be below Barron Creek, and we continue. And again, this construction and the tunnels can be done without impacts to the surface facilities. And then as we start coming back to our portal for the south, again, we have to look at constructing a shoe fly around that portal. Alma does get necked down during construction in this location. And again, as we're building these shoe flies, we have to do the reconfiguration of Alma Street, but here we don't have Alma at one way, we have Alma with one lane in each direction. And to be noted that these at-grade crossings will remain after the fact because this will be the permanent freight alignment for the freight with the passenger being in the tunnels. Then we can, once we have the shoe fly done, we can then construct the trench. Again, we have at Adobe Creek, this trench would actually block Adobe, and we have the extreme challenge of how to divert a creek from just an engineering standpoint as well as an environmental standpoint as well. And then the northernmost end is the San Antonio Caltrain platform. And then we just turn around, and this is just kind of showing the trench construction at the south end as we bring it back to the portal, somehow working an engineering feat with Adobe Creek. And the portal here is again the same as the northern portal, about 90 feet by 40 feet. And you can come back and construct a partial roof at the north end as well as the south end. And then the final configuration is the passenger rail runs in the tunnels, and then the freight remains at grade and runs during non-revenue hours for Caltrain, which means it would continue to run at night. And because you have at-grade crossings, these freight trains will have to blow their horn per FAA regulations. So that also will be part of what will remain in this particular scenario. So there's a little bit more, it goes on a little bit further, but I'm going to move on to, we also were asked to take a look at Churchill, some additional Churchill alternatives in addition to what we had previously looked at, and there's a station here for the alternatives that have no longer in consideration, but we were asked to take a look at what a Churchill viaduct, and then we're also asked to look at Churchill Closure. And with the Churchill Closure, I'll go into what that means here is when I get to that slide. But first, let me talk about the viaduct. So in the viaduct, as you start from the at-grade, you're going to have a portion of the viaduct before you go to bridge. It's going to be on retained earth with retaining walls. And then we still also have to have a shoe fly on this one. And so this is looking north, that the ultimate Caltrain alignment would be on embankment and on structure, and there's a temporary shoe fly that is built towards Alma, and we're able to have Alma 28 feet. As you move up, as you start to go higher, then you'll go from embankment and you'll be on actual structure. This is just an example structure. This is not, there's multiple types of structure that could be used for a viaduct. So I'm going to run through a 3D animation for this as well. This is the familiar aerial, and we did look at a viaduct for Charleston Meadow. So just to give you perspective, that's the purple line to the right, and then what we're looking at here is a viaduct for Churchill. So moving down, and this is the area, and so in this vicinity we also have the Stanford Game Day platform. The red line is the shoe fly that would need to be constructed for this viaduct, and the pink line was the viaduct alignment. So we're starting again at the north end. We need to remove some vegetation. There's some minor utility work because we're really leaving everything at the surface and constructing up. We need to put in a barricade prior to constructing the shoe fly. Alma's neck down to one lane in each direction. And once we have the shoe fly, then we move Caltrain operations to this temporary tracks, and then that allows us to be able to start construction of the viaduct. As we start up, this is the portion that's going to be on embankment, but also because we're raising the tracks, we'll also be eliminating the Stanford Game Day station. We also need to do some fortification or strengthening of the Embarcadero bridge because trains are much heavier than cars, and so the shoe fly would be on that existing bridge. So right about Town and Country is where we'd start going into aerial structure, where you have some kind of breezeway underneath that you're high enough, and you're on bridge structure. Churchill can remain open during this construction, but we do have some lane changes during construction as well. But Churchill does remain open during this construction. Once the viaduct is, it's going faster than I can. Once the viaduct is constructed, trains would then move back up to the viaduct. We remove the shoe fly, and you could then replant some kind of vegetation. This is just a view looking east, and this is a view looking, that was a view looking west. This is a view looking east at the viaduct this is looking towards Alma. And then just finally, this is just we honed in, we were asked to kind of get a total view of the viaduct, and this is just moving along where we're on Embankment until about Town and Country. We're on Structure, past the high school, past Churchill, and then right about Lowell, we go back down to Embankment, and then we conform, or we meet back at the existing grade just around Rita Avenue. Oh, Santa Rita, excuse me. I was just reading the last part, thank you. So I'm not going to go into the detail. This is a matrix, and we do have a station where actually Eileen is sitting right now, but Millette will be sitting there. But this is the City Council adopted criteria, items A through J. And what we tried to do was to do a comparison relative to the two alternatives. And with blue as being the most improvement, and red is the worst. But I'm not going to go into this. But I encourage you to go to the station and make your comments whether we think this is the right comparison or the wrong comparison. I just want to point out that between these two alternatives, the amount of construction time is about the same. The amount of cost, the magnitude of cost is about the same. But the cost for the passenger freight, the first one, when they're running together, is a slightly more because we actually then we will demolish the shoe fly, whereas in the other one you would leave that railroad track in place as a permanent track. So these were the criteria that we're comparing the two alternatives against each other, which is the City Council criteria. But also we wanted to kind of look at the engineering challenges. And some of the biggest engineering challenges for the South Palo Alto are the creeks and the impacts to creek and we do have a couple of hydraulic engineers, drainage engineers here if you have any questions on that. But we have some challenges with that as far as how do you even manage to divert that large of a flow? You could have increased risk due to flooding. You also have long-term maintenance, not only because of the creeks, but also because these tunnel is below groundwater. I believe groundwater in Palo Alto is about 13 feet below surface. So we'd be having to deal with that. Major utility relocations. And then also the circulation at Alma is going to be an issue during construction and in the final configuration for one of these. And the last thing is both of these alternatives require a design exception from Caltrain. So Caltrain criteria is railroad should be at a 1% grade. The 1% grade will not work at all. So both these alternatives are looking at a 2% grade, which is not a guarantee that Caltrain would grant us a variance for that design criteria. So I'm going to quickly jump into the Churchill Closure. And so just to talk about the Churchill Closure is when we're looking at Churchill Closure, we're actually looking at an alternate that builds in a bike ped undercrossing of some sort. And we've developed two options of that so far. In addition to that, which Gary will talk about, is some of the improvements that need to occur in order to make the Churchill Closure work, or the mitigation measures that need to occur. So before I turn it over to Gary, quickly, this is the option one where we have the pedestrian undercrossing under the railroad tracks. So there's a ramp that parallels the railroad tracks. It goes down to the north. There's a tunnel underneath the Caltrain tracks, and then there's a ramp up on the west side. This is another view just looking north you can see the ramps kind of going down parallel to the tracks, crossing over, and then coming up. So this is what we call option one. This is a second option, and again, we have exhibits over out here in the stations that you can go and talk to the engineers. That we were asked can you do a ped bike crossing that goes under both Alma and the railroad tracks? And what the alternative here is to come down the middle of Churchill, go underneath both those, and then daylight on the other side of the tracks. This is another view, kind of at street view, looking down. And the constraint here is we do have residential driveways that we were trying to avoid impact, which is why it's kind of going down the middle of the road. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Gary to talk about some of the...
Okay, yeah, this works. So my name's Gary Black with Hexagon Transportation Consultants, and we're transportation engineering consultants hired by the city to take a look at what happens if Churchill gets closed. We recognize that if Churchill's closed, there's traffic that's using Churchill today that would be rerouted to other streets. So we were asked to determine whether the traffic that was rerouted, whether that would create any impacts, and then if it would, what improvements would we need to accommodate that traffic. The amount of traffic that's using the Churchill crossing now is about 400 cars in the peak direction per hour. So in the morning, it's about 400 cars that are going towards the high school. In the afternoon, it's about 400 cars. In 1 hour, they're going the other way. So that's the amount of traffic that needs to go somewhere else if Churchill gets closed. We have a traffic report it's not quite on the website yet or available electronically, but it'll shortly be made available electronically so you can look at the traffic report that has all the details, because I'm going to just touch on a couple of not minor, but a couple things here. There's a lot more detail in the actual traffic report. So we determined that the traffic would either be rerouted to Oregon Expressway Page Mill Road or Embarcadero, because those are the two crossings on either side of Churchill. And so that's where those 400 cars would go. And so we looked at the locations where that traffic would have an impact. And the most challenging location is at Embarcadero and Alma, which I call the Embarcadero-Alma interchange. And as you know, there are some connecting ramps there, but it's an incomplete interchange, and so some of the movements necessary to go between Alma and Embarcadero and vice versa involve using residential city streets. And so we don't want to increase the traffic on those residential streets. So we're looking at options for reconfiguration at this, I'll call it interchange, so that, for example, traffic doesn't need to use Lincoln and High Street and Emerson. So this diagram here shows one of the options, and as you can see, this is kind of animated, right? Why don't you push the button? So that shows the concept of perhaps a new bike ped bridge over Embarcadero, so that the signal that's at the crosswalk right now at Town and Country, that signal could be removed. And then right now, as you know, you turn right from Embarcadero onto Kingsley if you want to make that connection, so that would be maintained. We would need to increase the capacity of Alma Street northbound with this configuration. So we're showing the bridge slightly widened to get 2 lanes northbound and 2 lanes southbound. Right now, there's only 1 lane northbound there. And then we would have a turn pocket to go from Alma onto Kingsley. And here's the main new feature, is a traffic signal at the intersection of Kingsley and Embarcadero. So then if you were traveling on Embarcadero, say westbound towards El Camino, you wanted to go to Alma, you could just turn left at that signal, take Kingsley up to Alma, and it's not shown here, but there would be another signal at Kingsley and Alma, so you could make that connection. So it wouldn't be necessary to go around what I call around the block on city streets in order to make that connection. I should say this is a preliminary conceptual design, so don't think it's going to exactly look like this. There's a lot more, there's other options, and there's a lot more work that needs to be done in the design of this. But the concept, we want to convey the concept is to make improvements at this interchange so that all the movements can be made at the interchange and not have to use the residential streets. Okay. There were a couple of other intersections that also would need improvement because of this added traffic if Churchill was closed. One of those intersections is El Camino and Embarcadero. There would be an added lane there. Go to the next one. Then right now, I'll call it the interchange between Alma and Oregon Expressway. That would need traffic signals. Right now it doesn't have any, so there would be additional delays caused there. So that would need traffic signals. And I think we have one more. So, and this is, excuse me, at the intersection of El Camino and Page Mill, where there would be added, excuse me, turn lanes there, plus some signal modifications. And I think, yeah. So I just wanted to say that the concepts that you saw there, I know we went through it really fast. We have a traffic table right here towards the back. So after we're done, you can come up and I'll meet with you and talk to you about answering more traffic questions, whatever. But with those improvements that we were talking about, we would be able to accommodate those cars that are now using Churchill, that instead we use Embarcadero and Oregon Expressway, Page Mill Road. Then the last two slides are the matrix of evaluation of the Churchill Closure versus the viaduct. We're not going to go over these, but at the evaluation table over here, if you want to take a closer look at all the criteria, the pros and cons of these two options, then you can do that at the evaluation table.
Then I'll turn it back to Lynn.
All right. Well, thank you so much for indulging us and not having 1,000 hands go up. You do have a copy of the matrix with you, not only this new information, but every single one that we've got all on the same sheet. So on both sides. So the one first side is the council criteria, and the back side is that engineering concerns and challenges that Etty was speaking to. So we have a few minutes for Q&A. This is really clarifying. This is not the time to leave your thoughts in the sense. That's why we've got comment cards, and we are going to want to spend about a half an hour at least at the station. So I'm going to start with this lady in the front, and then we'll come down of this gentleman, and then in pink. So Brett, you're going to go first, and then Millette will take this person and the lady on the end, and then I'll call some more folks on this side. We'll work our way back. We'll go Brett here, and then the lady in green in the middle.
Yeah.
And then I'll pick some more folks. Okay, you have the
I'll
floor.
make it brief. This is Gene Bosman. I live at Evergreen Drive. And I'm surprised because I thought I was going to talk about viaducts and tunnels, but what I came away with here is worrying about kids and bikes. Because we had a lot of comments about cars, but I know every morning dozens and dozens and dozens of kids are zipping around in packs. And one thing we saw on Ross Road was the idea of the bike boulevard. I just would urge you guys not to compress the bike lanes too close to this increased traffic due to the squeezing. It's going to be very important to have these safe and clearly marked boundaries for the kids and the bikes. And that's all I have to say.
Thank you very much. All right. On the corner, and then the lady in pink, and then this gentleman right here, and then green, and then we'll come back on this side. Go ahead.
So one of the big issues that came up originally was the suicides in town and the intersection of students and railroad tracks. And so I question why bother having an at-grade freight train possibility when you're going to have a tunnel? I mean, is there a real reason that that's it? Doesn't look at the time or the cost would be significantly different. So why was that even brought up?
Etty, can you address that? I know you were asked by the council to do this, but do you know why the council asked you to do that?
This was a request, I think, that came out of the community, and then it then went to the council, and the council made a decision that we would need to take a look at it. So that was at per direction per council.
I believe it's because of the size, the shrinking down of the footprint, and I think they thought there could be more advantages to the neighbors as well as Alma. So I think that was what was driving it at the time. But very good point. Yes?
You didn't really talk about the viaduct option. It was on the list. The viaduct in South Palo Alto across Meadow and Charleston. But if we decided to do a viaduct there and a viaduct at Churchill, would they be connected as a viaduct so we could get rid of the underpass at Oregon Expressway and maybe even the one at Embarcadero in the process? Or would this be two separate viaducts?
So we were asked to, we did look at a viaduct at Charleston Meadow, and I believe it's over on this side of the room, and that's still in play. Currently, is in the video you shot, they are not connected, that we can land, the Charleston Meadow viaduct comes down to meet the existing grade, and then it would, if you had both of them, then it would rise back up. But we did not look at a full connected viaduct. But I believe that there was a city, there was a previous Alto. So
Well,
Ed.
Sure. So, direct response to the question, as Etty pointed out, did not look at it. It certainly could be done. Ultimately, it's an issue of funding, that it would be more costly to keep a structure for that distance. Also require reconstruction of the California Avenue station to have it at a higher level as well. So, those are certainly things that could be looked at beyond the scope of just the grade separations themselves, but that's as far as this work has gone right now.
Okay. We've got this person, the person in green. Then I'm going to get back over here. So white turtleneck. And do we have anybody else here? And then the gentleman on the end there with the lime green shirt. And then we'll come back on this side. And then I'll get some of the ones back there. Yes.
So 2 questions. One, my understanding from the city council meetings that started this some time ago was that the Embarcadero changes were going to be out of scope. So I'm just wondering when they became in scope. And separately, if the Embarcadero changes are to be considered as part and parcel of the closure option, then the costs for that should very probably be included, and I don't see any estimate for those costs. And at least with the preliminary thing I see there, I think we'd have to do a regrading at minimum. Anyway, there would be costs.
Okay, do you want to speak to that, Ed?
Sure. The question was, why are we looking at Embarcadero? And I think, as Gary pointed out, it was really specifically for the purpose of mitigating the traffic caused by closing or anticipated with closing Churchill. So that's the reason that, again, to flesh out a viable option, that any consideration was given to modifying Embarcadero. The costs are included, I believe, in the cost that you're seeing on the fact sheets.
the cost for just the sliver widening for the bridge.
So we don't have the cost for the mitigations that.
Yes, no, those are in cost, but not. I think the question kind of alluded to rebuilding Embarcadero Bridge, and that's not in the scope right now.
And if I could just add an additional clarification, so when you look at that fact sheet there, every improvement that's described in there is included in the cost breakdown that's on that fact sheet.
Okay.
So I just had a couple of questions and comments about the traffic analysis. It struck me for the first time tonight that there is no mention of maintaining good traffic movement overall as a criteria for evaluating all of the options. And I was really struck by one of the options for South Palo Alto that would result in a 2-lane Alma. And I'm thinking, oh my God, really? And it seems to me we should consider bringing up with council that maintaining good traffic flow in the whole area after changes have been made at the grade crossings as one of the evaluation criteria. It's not on there now. Only east-west connectivity is on there. And then my second thing is I may be confused, but there was an earlier study of the traffic that goes along Churchill currently, and I know this study looked at only peak hour traffic, but it was my understanding that almost 10,000, 9,000 and something cars a day, average weekday, travel along Churchill. And so looking just at 1 hour and saying, oh, it's only 400 cars, no problem, and then showing a picture of a very scantily, very lightly traveled Embarcadero I think it's a little misleading, and we should really, I just want to ask about those assumptions, why it was done that way, and might there be something else more comprehensive that needs to be done?
We'll get Gary to answer that question.
Well, I can't answer about the picture and why there's no cars shown on Embarcadero, but in terms of the traffic on Churchill, we did count 24-hour counts for a week on Churchill, so we do have the volume throughout the day, and I can tell you that the 400 cars, that's the peak, that's the highest hour of the day. So if we 9,000 like you said. So if we can accommodate the peak, then we can accommodate the times when the traffic is lower.
Okay, the lady in the white turtleneck.
Thank you. Barbara Hazlett from the 1100 block of Emerson Street. Gary, you're still on board here. With respect to the concept redesign of Embarcadero, it looks like a very complicated intersection to me. And I'm curious, I mean, you've done a lot of work looking at Churchill and sort of the backup for the light, et cetera. Have you looked at what the backup will look like down Embarcadero if you put that intersection in? Will it back up all the way to Middlefield? And I think it's a very bold statement to say that people won't use ways and other methods to go through all of our arterial residential streets. I think that's very bold. Thank you.
So let's get the answer to the question. Did you look at the backup on Embarcadero?
Yes, we looked at the backup on Embarcadero. It would not go to Middlefield, and it would not go, the other way to El Camino. There's a lot more details available to people that want to dig down into this particular issue.
So go to his table. All right, now we've got the gentleman on the aisle here, Millette, with the green. He's got his hands up. He's wearing yes. So if you could grab the mic, because we're being taped. So if we could get him the microphone, that would be great. And then I'm going to go to this gentleman in blue, and then I'm going to take the lady in the middle, and then the one in the rust in the very back. You're my last one on this side. And then I've got those two hands over there sitting next to each other, and the one behind are the last three, because I got to get you time at the stations. Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to see if we could add to the discussion about the viaduct the two issues. One of them is possible house valuations of houses that are going to have a train going 40, 50 feet up. That's going to be a huge impact on Mariposa and Castilleja. Secondly, also the privacy of those neighbors who are going to be on Mariposa and Castilleja and having a train that's going to be 40 to 50 feet up in the air looking down at their houses. That is not a criteria that's in there. And I want to echo the lady's point about bicycles and people. I live on Churchill, and I have seen my pets were killed on Churchill. My neighbor was hit by a car on Churchill. My kids went to Palo, and they had to dodge cars all the time. There's a significant issue with traffic and safety of people getting in and out of Palo, which I think the lady in the front brought up. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Just a couple of questions about the shoe fly and the timing. What is the timing of the electrification of the trains, and is the shoe fly solution going to be before that or after that, and how does that apply to the freight trains also?
So the electrification construction is going on right now as we speak. I'm not sure of the time frame for that to be complete, but all of our alternatives when we look at the shoe fly assume electrification and assume that we have to have the shoe fly be electrified to accommodate electrified trains, and then the ultimate condition has to have electrified trains as well.
And then the freight? What's the assumption on the freight?
What was the question about the assumption of the freight? Yes, the shoe flies are designed for both freight and passenger rail for that criteria, yes.
Okay, and then we had back there, lady in cream right there, Brent, right there. And then we had the person in the rust on that side. Yes.
Lady in Cream sounds like a good Hitchcock movie. So hi, thank you. So I live on Emerson, and we've been asking because we also have a lot of Palo and people who bike on that corridor. I counted with my neighbor 300, and we saw a couple near misses. What we would like to see on both corridors, both Churchill and the Embarcadero corridor, is a really good bike ped plan that is actually shown and in the concept plan. And I suggest that you look all the way back to Bryant, because that's how the kids and everybody links up. They go Bryant, Kingsley, through Embarcadero. So we would like to see that as a priority if you're going to re-engineer. We've been asking for it for years, and we would really like to see that for the safety of all our kids. Thank you.
Okay, and then the rest in the middle there. There she goes.
Thank you. So I have a question about the diagram that shows the 6 lanes on Embarcadero, including the turn lanes. So that road is a historic 2-lane road about the width of Bryant. It's about 60, 65 feet. So 3 questions. I guess, where is that right of way coming from for the 6 lanes? and the impact on the sidewalk, landscape strip, and the houses on Embarcadero. And related to that is what is the cost for changing that area? And third is what are the other kind of the ancillary costs that will come? Because evidently the DIIR for Stanford shows that the Middlefield Embarcadero Road is failing, and so there will be a cascade of other impacts which will be required if you push more traffic down Embarcadero. And what are the costs of those?
Okay, Gary, I don't know that you can answer cost, but can you talk about the 6-lane right-of-way and all that, or is that an edgy question?
I can talk about that. The design that we showed, that you saw, would not require any right-of-way. That's within the existing right-of-way. Was there?
Have you costed it, Eddie?
The cost of the...
Yeah, the cost is on the fact sheet.
So it's already within the larger estimate.
Correct.
Yeah. So if you've got some questions on that, maybe talking to Gary at the break. And then as far as cascading down other ancillary, we haven't chased that all the way out yet. Is that a true statement?
Well, we did look at 2030 volumes in addition to
no
existing.
other streets.
Well, our analysis showed that the impact of closing Churchill would not extend as far down as Middlefield. So there wouldn't be any, from that project, there wouldn't be any change down that far to Middlefield.
Okay. All right. Did I have one more person back at the very back, or am I on this side? Do you remember, Brett? Okay, good. Millette, you remember who I called on. I already picked on 3, and those are our last ones because it's already 20 after. If I give you half an hour, we got 10 minutes of 8 to reconvene.
Thank you. Peggy Kraft. I live in Palo Alto, obviously. Quick question about the viaduct, since I'm going to guess that's the way you're going to go because of cost and tunneling and environmental impact. So if that were the case, how do you keep the viaduct from attracting homeless people to live underneath it? When I look at your pictures, I just see, with the housing shortage we have you considered a berm or something that would make it impossible for people to live underneath it? And since you're looking at quite a bit of viaducting, that would certainly be a very bad thing for Palo Alto, I believe. And I know I haven't been in all the discussions. This is just a quick question. Why not grade separate? Life will go on. This seems like a huge project that's going to cause all kinds of problems. Has that was addressed by the city council already? Okay, that was like 10 questions, but mainly the viaduct.
Okay, well, no, let's get you some good answers here. So the homeless, is there something that can be done in the design of the viaduct to prevent homelessness underneath?
Well, what we did do is there's some exhibits here that we tried to go to find viaducts that were placed elsewhere, and what they did for those viaducts, which is lineal parks, skate parks. And the like. There is a viaduct that in the Ohlone Greenway, which was built in the Berkeley area, and that I don't think it has attracted that kind of thing. But again, it's really about making something that's attractive that keeps it activated, and then that can help allay that problem. But that's something that would have to be looked at. What was the other question?
Why not no grade SEP? And is that still on the table?
It is always on the table through the environmental process. So that there is always, even in this stage, the no build is always, it will be carried through in the next phase of work, which is in the environmental process.
So it's still an option. And then if you would hand the mic to the person next to you in the blue, he's the next person. And then I have that one person right behind. Okay. And then that person right there with the blue shirt, you're our last speaker. And then we're going to go to the stations. I'll explain where they all are. Yes, sir.
My question right now is, I haven't been involved with the process, but was there a criteria developed or established for emergency responses, particularly as you start closing crossings and traffic is congested more and more on some of the remaining crossings?
Etty, do you want to talk about emergency coordination, how you've been doing that with the city and others?
So yes, we have met, actually the city staff met with the police department and the fire department, and they actually issued letters on this, in the fact that with grade separations you can increase response times because those, as we saw, those excessive queues, those excessive queues also hold up, emergency response as well. So if you grade separate, you would actually see an improvement because your response times would be improved because you wouldn't be waiting at a stop sign.
But
Excuse
not
me?
during construction.
Well, not during, construction would be another factor that would have to be looked at.
So Churchill, absolutely, that was part of the conversation, the closure of Churchill with both police and fire. Ed, did you want to add anything? Were you in that meeting? I believe you were.
Yeah, as a part of the documentation, I think we're still working on how best to make sure the reports are available. But as Etty pointed out, we have had ongoing discussions with police and fire, in particular, on all of these options. And I think basically confirming some common sense that maybe not for the fire issue because this is actually something that they simulated. They concluded that the closure of Churchill really wouldn't affect their response times because of the location of the station and the way that their response routes are set up. On the police side, as you I'm sure know, police are constantly roaming. They are on patrols, so that it's not an inherent change for day-to-day police response, but as you'd expect, if Churchill were closed, they would have one less access point to Pali High School. And so what would be a route for emergency response to Pali via Churchill would no longer be available. So we're talking to them about other ways to mitigate any limitation that they would have on access there. But again, it's similar to any other emergency response in other parts of town.
Great. All right. Thank you very much. I want to give you where the stations are and remind you we have about a half an hour at the stations. I'll let you know when you're about 15 minutes. So a reminder, traffic is in the far corner up here and noise is right next to them. These are the new designs that you saw for the first time tonight if you're a repeat attendee. We've got city staff here talking about things that have been dropped and other city processes. We have all the videos that we've done, not only the 2 from tonight, but the 4 previous ones available. They're all labeled. We have somebody going to work the matrix, so if you've got issues and want to take exception to how it was done or want to ask questions, we're happy to take that feedback. Over in the corner are your geo and hydrologists there, and then all in front of the window are previous boards from previous meetings. We will reconvene in a half an hour, and all of this material is up or will be up on the website. Thank you. Don't forget your comment cards. give them 15 minutes. Okay, we're about halfway through our time, so if you've not been moving around, this would be a good time to move around and see all the stations before we reconvene in about 12 minutes. Okay, folks, we have about another 5 minutes or so, so please make your way to whatever you consider to be your last station. Or if you're done and want to take a seat, then we can get going on the report outs in a few minutes. they have I'm gonna. Okay, folks, if we could get you to take a seat. It seems like lots of people have been leaving and hopefully leaving their comment cards. And what we're going to do now is ask each of our stations and some of our key people to do some report outs, and I will be taking notes. And if you want to leave, you're welcome to leave, but do leave us your thoughts on the comment card. But if you want to stay, we need you to sit down, and then we can get the meeting adjourned here. So if you want to stay, please take a seat so we can hear the reports. And if you want to keep talking, if you could go out in the courtyard, that would be just great, because we're going to start the report outs very soon. Okay, so especially Gary's group, I need you guys to come down front. Gary, you in particular, our noise people, if you would come down front, because the folks are anxious to hear what you're learning. Peter, Elliot, Millette, our hydrologist, John, Peter, I need you to come down front. We're doing our report outs. We promised these folks we get them out at 8, so I want to make sure all of our people who are going to speak are going to be down front ready to do that. If you could come out from behind your station and come on over. Elliot, please come over. Etty, come on down. Chantel, Ed, y'all are going to have a report out from your station here. All righty. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the traffic folks, because they always have the most fun at this meeting. And Gary and Tricia are going to give us some few thoughts on some of the themes. I don't need every conversation regurgitated. I just need some top thinking and thoughts and maybe 5 or 6 big ideas. I know you're going to turn in your longer version notes. So between the two of you, if you want to tell us what happened at traffic.
Okay. So I'll start off. Tricia and I both talked to people, so we probably have some different notes here. There was one comment to look at a different configuration for the intersection of Embarcadero and Alma, which actually was a very creative idea, which we can go into more detail later, but it's to depress Alma and make that a regular intersection. We had some strong feelings that said don't close Churchill, and then we also had some strong feelings that said close Churchill. So, the very strong opinions on both sides of that. A lot of people said they don't think that more cars can actually be accommodated on Embarcadero, that Embarcadero backs up right now worse than we say it does, and asked that Embarcadero be addressed irrespective of the grade separation project. There was some question about what developments we put into the future forecasts, and so we need to take a look at that. A couple people mentioned that they would like to see the barricade on Park Boulevard in Southgate to be removed so that street you can go up and down there. And let's see, another interesting comment was, or a question really, is since this project is going to take 6 or 7 years, maybe more, and trains are going to increase, are there any things that we can do at these crossings right now today, different, irrespective of this project, to improve those crossings now? Did you have anything else?
Okay. And we also had concern about impacts to bicycles at Alma and Embarcadero intersection with the increase in the traffic. So that's something that they wanted us to look into. And also the emergency response time on Embarcadero Road with the new improvements and with the rerouted traffic through Embarcadero.
Okay, thank you. Noise. Is that Paul?
Yes, my name is Paul, and I'm a noise control engineer, and I was at the noise table, which is very handy. And not maybe ironic that everybody who came to the noise table said that they're bothered by noise and they think there's something we should do about it. And there's two main issues, I think. Number one is especially people, and a lot of people I talk to live very near the grade crossings where there's a federal law that regulates. They sound that horn every time they go through, and it's very loud, knocks them out of bed. And the good news is that virtually any one of these alternatives would eliminate all or most of the horn soundings. But there still were some concerns, and one of the other concerns that came up often is on the viaduct option, say, well, if you're just raising the train up 25, 30 feet in the air, isn't that going to project noise further out into the neighborhood? And the answer is, if we didn't do something about it, that would be a problem. But all the diagrams we're seeing here would suggest that the designs would include like a parapet wall, like a 6-foot barrier along the edge of the viaduct, which, if it's done correctly with acoustical absorption on the inside, can very effectively mitigate that noise, the wheel rail noise, from the electric trains.
Thank you. John, were you at our new?
Right, I was at the tunnels.
Okay, I need you guys to get the...
Okay, for the tunnels, we have both options there, the freight at grade and the freight and passenger in the tunnel. There were discussions about the geometry and basically looking at seeing if on the north portal, if it could be shifted south somewhat, and we'll take a look at that. Also, there were discussions about this diameter of the tunnel, and that we could do a deeper dive with Caltrain and try and pin them down somehow or other to a smaller diameter tunnel. Right now we're utilizing their criteria, but in this concept phase, that's what we have to go on. But just like the design exceptions for steeper grades, there would have to be...
If I could get the back row to bring it down or go out, we hear you more than you know. Thank you.
So just like the grades, we would be a design exception and study for reducing the diameter of the tunnels.
Great. Chantel and Ed from the city table.
It's just me. Ed gave me the microphone. For better or worse. So we had great discussions over here. The high level things are thinking about children on bikes related to Churchill, Embarcadero, and Kingsley. So making sure that those things are factored in comprehensively. People had questions about why certain alternatives were taken off the table, particularly about the citywide tunnel. So if anyone wants more information about that, we referred them to the city council video from May 13th, 2019. And then also about why alternatives which put the cars in the road over the rail were taken off, and mostly it has to do with the steepness of the road that would require. There were questions about water, questions about our partnership with Caltrain and what influence Caltrain has in this process. And lastly, there was information about the Chi-Chi fly and that we should take that into consideration. I had to Google it, so recommend the same for you. No. Thank you.
Chi-Chi fly. Okay, thank you. All right, I am going to have, we didn't have anybody working the videos particularly, but they are all online, and one of the guests tonight and I were joking that this is what he's going to convene his friends and family this weekend and run them all through.
Hello, I'm Leslie with RECO. We were on the creek and drainage table. So the questions and conversations we had circled around very much on the feasibility, mostly for the trench and tunnel options and the impacts those would have to the creeks. We had questions regarding the siphon or getting the creek underneath those tunnels and the clogging potential and how that could impact upstream flooding if not maintained regularly, and just the feasibility of conveying that much water, which is a significant amount of water. And then on top of that, the big challenge of trying to get environmental approval due to regulatory requirements. There's a law that we have to investigate the least impactful alternative, and the trench and tunnel would not be considered the least impactful alternative to those regulatory agencies. Then there were comments regarding the current condition of the creek, both that it's currently damaged and they don't want to make it any worse, but also if it's currently damaged, then why does it matter for environmental protections and regulations? So that was the summary for creek and drainage.
Yeah, I'm Millette with AECOM, and I was at the evaluation matrix table. And the question I got a couple times was asking about the status of the design exceptions with Caltrain. That is an ongoing process with them. Caltrain has provided to us a high-level process that they want to go through, and we have sent to them some technical memos for the Meadow Charleston alternatives, which we started the design on much earlier, outlining, how long is this increased grade? Why did we have to do it? Why did we want to do that? And then they're likely coming back with us to say, okay, well then if we're going to consider this, then we're going to need some additional analysis in certain areas. And one of them that we're suspecting will come is with the electrification. Some of you, with electrification and you increase the grade, that means they need more power in order to get the train through the corridor. So that's a significant, they want to verify that the system as they have it designed now could accommodate that increased grade. And if it doesn't, what would they have to do to make that work? So it's definitely looking at the rail corridor operationally as well as from an engineering perspective. And it is a process that we have to go through, but it is ongoing, and we are talking with Caltrain about that. The other comment I got was that the Alma Street impacts that were identified during construction and outside of that are significant, and they shouldn't be ignored. That will be a significant impact to the community. And the other was where can I find information on some of the other alternatives that weren't highlighted tonight? You've heard it here tonight. Go to the website. If you go to what alternatives are being considered and you scroll down to the bottom, it also has alternatives that are no longer being considered, that the materials are still there. So check it out.
Okay, Peter and Etty, and then I'm going to go down just for anybody else who has anything to add after these two go about the previously shown project materials.
Very good. I'm Peter with AECOM. I was at the station with the PED bike options at Churchill for the closure of the at-grade crossing at Churchill. There was a general concern about the volume of pedestrians, especially bikes actually, at the start of school and the end of school, getting through a relatively narrow path and tunnel. So there was a consensus that people would like to see the path and the tunnel be made as wide as possible. There is generally good feedback. That's the first one. The second one is there's really good feedback about option 2 that takes the undercrossing or the tunnel underneath the tracks and underneath Alma as well. And then the third one was one woman in particular, she appreciated the fact that there are mitigation measures being looked at Alma and Embarcadero for the closure at Churchill. But she said, I think it's a good point, is maybe we look at some of these other mitigation measures for not just that alternative, but for the other alternatives as well.
I have a mic.
Yeah, he's still mic'd.
So I was at the Churchill Viaduct alternative, and there was a couple comments. First off was that, in a viaduct, we do have an unsecured right-of-way, so people can, potentially, at the ends of the viaduct, get up and, walk up onto the viaduct because you can't fence it. There was also some concerns that Elliot heard about, the use underneath the viaduct, how to avoid homeless. Are there potentials for park-like features, and would Caltrain be willing to let that right-of-way be used for other uses of the underneath the viaduct? And then there was also some concerns about the height of the viaduct, and how we would what that would look like from people's backyard. And there is actually there is a simulation that down here that was created for a view from somebody's backyard looking up at the viaduct. And then finally there was another concern is like how getting a view of the viaduct from a further away distance, more, what was it, Marius, from?
Yeah, basically trying to not see the viaduct and how far that distance would be.
So getting a view, like if you're several blocks back, what did the viaduct look like? So, and I think that's. Oh, and I did get a comment that related to The tunnels, which was what Millette was talking about, is the variance in the process, and it should be not a deal breaker for an alternative.
Do we have anything to add on the Meadow, Charleston? Okay. All right. Well, very, very much appreciate you staying. You were terrific. Please turn in your cards. Happy holidays. We'll see you in 2020. So thank you.